everyone, and welcome to the Empowering Women podcast. Hard to believe, but it is already our second episode of 2024. Do you ever meet someone you just know is special that you connect with immediately? Well, that's how I feel about today's guest, Dannette, or Dani for short, Nelson. I had the absolute privilege to listen to her speak on diversity, equity, and inclusion at the Association of Manufacturing Excellence, or AME for short, conference. And I was spellbound. Just a phenomenal message that really resonated with the audience in the room. And I am so excited to share her with you. So welcome, Dani, to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Shannon. Thanks for having me today. I'm excited to be here.
And she is having already a rocking 2024 because she just launched her own company, Stone Soup Diversity Consulting. So, Dani, my first question is always tell me your story. So tell me a little bit about the journey that brought you to this point. And then we're going to focus on what made you start this wonderful new adventure.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. Appreciate it. So just a little bit about my journey. This is actually my third career almost now. I started many years ago in employment litigation of all things. So I
Oh my
went to
goodness.
law school and wanted to really change the world via employment litigation. It's an interesting quest, but there I was, probably back in the 90s, deciding to go to law school. I had worked for law firms specifically in employment litigation for a number of years. And so as a paralegal, all of my kind of law school and lawyer buddies were saying, Dani, it's time. Let's go to law school. So I did. It was rough. I went 4 years at night while working at a law firm
Oh.
during the day while my daughter was pretty young. Got through it, super excited to be out on the other side of it. And ended up really supporting, my role was really kind of supporting clients that were being probably sued or dealing with wrongful termination claims. I was the person to prepare the HR professional or sometimes the CEO on how to manage being in the courtroom, how to manage depositions, how to deal with what's called discovery in the litigation world. That was my world for a number of years. And interestingly enough, as I continued down that journey, I met more and more HR folks. And those folks kept saying, Dani, you should come over to HR. It's like come to the dark side. We have cookies or something, you know? So they kept saying, come on over, become an HR professional. It's less hours, not always, it's less hours. And you'll get to meet more people. It won't just be in the confines of law firm. So after years and years of thinking about it, I went ahead and stopped working in a law firm. That was 15 years ago now. Went back to school, got my master's in HR. I had already had my law degree, but went back to the same school, finished my master's in HR, and started my career over. Started as like an HR generalist, HR manager, had the opportunity of working at LinkedIn as an HR business partner, and really solidified my HR practice in the high tech industry. And so my last 4 years were at a company called Gusto, amazing payroll company. Check it out if you haven't. And Gusto really helped me kind of see what my next vision was, what my next career at LinkedIn, we call it our next play. And at Gusto, I was both an HR business partner and I became a diversity partner. And that's really where I found my niche. And that's what I do today. I left Gusto, about 6 months ago now, and decided to open my own diversity practice called Stone Soup Diversity Consulting, where I teach and train others to have uncomfortable but be comfortable in the conversation around diversity. So that's kind of the TLDR, what the young folks say, too long didn't read. That's the TLDR for me.
I love the acronyms or alliterations because
Yes.
I'm learning. I have younger team members on my team, and I'm constantly looking up Google. What does that mean? What does
What
that
does
mean?
that mean? Right.
Just really quick, Stone Soup. Why the name? What is that? What does that mean?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
a different name.
yeah, it is. And people ask that all the time.
Yep.
So if you're not familiar, I think it's an old Eastern European tale about two children who lived in a village, very poor village, and they were all very hungry, the entire village. And the two children wanted to make some soup. Well, they had a pot and they had some water. And for their part in it, they decided to contribute a stone at the bottom of the pot. And what they did is they went around and asked each of the villagers to contribute something, whatever you have. Some villagers had a little meat, some had vegetables, some might have had maybe a little seasoning. So they went around the village and they were able to create this big pot of soup for the entire village. And that's really what is behind stone soup. You know, diversity is not one thing. It's not the stone in the pot, not the carrots, it's not the meat, it's not the vegetables, but it's a combination of things. It's a combination of ideas. And that's how we like to look at stone soup, making sure that people's voices are heard, people are seen, they're able to share their ideas in a vulnerable way, in a safe and brave space kind of way. So that's why I came up with the name Stone Soup, just kind of bringing the ingredients together to support diversity and inclusion best practices.
Such a beautiful story. I had heard part of it and I
Thank
wanted
you.
the audience to hear it. So I dropped that one on purpose.
Yay.
And really
Okay.
quick fact before we move into the hard stuff, she's also a huge Brene Brown fan. So we bonded over that immediately. So you may hear some of that come up along the conversation.
Yes.
So Dani and I are going to tackle what I think is a very timely and tough conversation. I'm going to call it diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging at risk. And I think there's a lot of changes that have happened in our world in the last couple of years. Obviously, we had the George Floyd murder back in 2020, if I'm right. Yeah. And that shifted a lot of things, but I also think some things have maybe unfortunately shifted backwards. They didn't stick. So I really want to talk about that topic, and I couldn't think of anybody better. So I'm going to start with a question. You know, as you think about your experiences, what are some common challenges you think organizations face when they're trying to integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging into their strategies? And then you can tell us a little bit about how you are hoping to help your clients with your company to address those challenges.
Yeah, and great question. And I think it's something that we all, as diversity practitioners, are looking at, are being thoughtful around. To your point, you know, George Floyd and his murder, I think what happened there, before I talk about the challenges, Shannon, George Floyd's murder really brought front and center what race relations might look like in different states, in different towns, against some, not all, police officers. I think before George Floyd, it was easy for us to move through the world and think, oh, I think that only happens in certain bubbles, in certain instances. But in 2020, for good or for bad, I think we were a captive audience. And we all saw what we saw on the screen. We all heard what we heard. And I think from that point, companies really, I mean, people in general kind of woke up to the reality of what race in this country could and might look like. And I think employees, those people who go to work, employees wanted to be able to talk and share about this issue and other issues regarding race, regarding diversity. So companies stood up and started taking notice. And I think when we saw an increase or like a spike in DEI&B relations and people needing to have the conversations around DEI&B, I think the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, those were all the catalysts that got us to the point of having the uncomfortable conversations. I saw that in 2020, 2021, but then I started seeing the challenges in 2022. And sadly, the challenges that I probably other diversity leaders have seen is implementing diversity initiatives in a performative way. And what I mean by performative is there's nothing really behind why the diversity issue is being implemented. There's no conversation. It's being implemented for the sake of being implemented, for keeping up with the Joneses, if you will. Hey, I see this company over here putting diversity initiatives together. I'll do that too. That's the biggest
And as a
challenge
talent
we
attractor
see.
too, I think, if they're
And
trying
as
to
a
attract,
talent
especially,
attractor,
yep, go ahead.
exactly. And I was actually going to thank you for that. I was just going to mention that a lot of folks will place on their career site, hey, we have diversity inclusion initiatives. Interestingly, a lot of folks and a lot of companies won't really outline what those initiatives are. So when the recruiter has a really viable candidate, the recruiter's not able to speak to the diversity initiative. Or if they're able to speak to it, they're not sure how to tie in the initiative with the company goals, with the mission, vision, and values, with how the candidate, if it's a woman, if it's a person of color, if it's someone from an underrepresented group, that person can't see themselves because the recruiter can't quite explain why they're doing this, why diversity is important. And that is a way of kind of being performative. Here's an example outside of the recruiting example. I think it was 2021. A couple of, I won't name the high tech companies, but a couple of high tech companies decided to adopt Juneteenth as
Mm.
a holiday, which is wonderful. I think our federal government also decided that it should be adopted state by state. Folks were adopting Juneteenth. Now, at Gusto, my previous company, we actually didn't adopt Juneteenth right away. And people were pointing at us and, hey, I thought you were diversity leaders. The reason why we didn't adopt it right away is because we wanted to create education and awareness. What is Juneteenth?
Mm.
Why is it important? Why are we giving that day off? Like MLK Day, like any other holiday. We want folks to know the why and why it's important to specific parts of the US culture and to our company culture. What some companies did, instead of educating their employees and having some awareness, they adopted it in a performative way. And when you ask their employees, hey, what do you know about Juneteenth and why do you have it off? Most of them would say, I don't know, it's another holiday. They have no idea.
Yeah.
And diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, the idea behind it is understanding why we celebrate these holidays. We have certain cultural holidays throughout our nation that we celebrate, but understand the why behind it. So those are the things I see. Those are challenges that I've been seeing along the way, that performative piece.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges I see, I'm not a diversity professional, as most everyone on is listening knows, but it's really the concept being a Caucasian female of privilege and truly
Right.
understanding
Yeah.
what privilege means. And I think it's something that my white brothers and sisters still struggle with. You've probably heard this. And I'll try to put a link in the show notes called the invisible knapsack. It's a really short
Oh, I'm
couple
very
page.
familiar. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
a
very
couple
familiar.
page, and it talks about how when you're a white person, you carry all these things with you in a knapsack, all these tools,
Mhm.
and you don't realize that you have those tools or those privileges. So privileges, things that are invisible to you, things that you never have to think about, that people either different ethnicities or different able-bodiedness or different sexual orientation have to think about. And to me, I think people get really uncomfortable with privilege. So, for example, they might say, well, I'll keep this a little less controversial. Why do we have a Women's History Month? Why can't we have a Men's History Month? And
Mhm.
what really, and I'm actually listening to one of Brené's old podcasts called Conversations with a Black Man right now. And he really does a really
Yes.
good job of talking about privilege in that way. And that's why, we have Black History Month or we have Women's History Month because, every other month is about those things, and they talk about, Brene talks about having Black family. There's a Black family class that she attended in college, and somebody asked that question. And the lady
Mhm.
said, well, here's X amount of other family classes that we have. If you want to attend a white family class, you can probably attend any of those classes and talk about
Pretty
the
much.
white family. So I think for me, that's one of
Yeah.
the challenges I see. People are really
Mhm.
uncomfortable with that concept of privilege.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Shannon. And to your point, and I'm happy to include this resource, one of the trainings that Stone Soup provides
Mm,
is a training solely on privilege. And what
mm,
that looks like, and I've done this live in class sessions live and I've done it over Zoom as well. And what that looks like is having individuals stand in a line in a room together. If they're comfortable, we even have them holding hands. And as we ask a series of questions, a lot of the individuals who are not folks of color and who are not of the female gender, they will walk to the front of the room where a lot of other folks who are of color and underrepresented groups are in the back of the room. And it's the breaking and releasing of hands that is really powerful for a lot of individuals. They feel like we're all brothers and sisters standing on the same line until we start looking at what our lives have looked like. And we ask basic questions. Did you get to go to summer camp? Did you have more than 50 books in your home? Did your parents own your home? Those are questions that we don't think are privileged, but they're very much privilege for many people. I also have, and I'll send you the resource, I have a video of the same thing, of a group of folks standing in line, and then the way the video is shot, watching them release hands. It's just so powerful. So I would agree with you. Privilege is a very uncomfortable conversation that I like folks to get comfortable with and be vulnerable about. As we talk about, Brene, people need to be vulnerable in those moments that matter, right?
Yeah, but they're and I am uncomfortable, so I'm right with them. I think we're all extremely
It's okay.
uncomfortable, and it's learning how to sit and be in that
Yeah.
uncomfortable space. That and it takes time. It's not something you do the first time and you say, "This is great. I want to do it again."
Right. Right. And that's very, very true. I would say that a lot of people look at DEIB as a kind of a check the box. Let's just do it the one time and we're okay. We've met our diversity and inclusion initiatives for the year,
Yep.
but it's different. Something I share in my Stone Soup trainings is it's not a compliance training. It's a discussion. It's not a lecture. It's a time for us to come together and get comfortable with the uncomfortable and then be able to share that conversation with others.
Yeah, I agree. And I think
Yeah,
I don't know what you think, but I think curiosity plays a huge role in that. I think you have to be curious and you have
sure,
to be open to things that you
sure.
may not have seen or understood or thought that happened in the world. Cause I know along this journey,
Yeah.
I've felt pretty ignorant at times of things that I'd never thought to be curious about.
Yep. And you know what? That's okay. Part of the diversity journey is meeting people where they are, not where
Mm,
you think you should be. There's no finger pointing, there's no shaming, there's no blaming around the teaching and training and
mm.
learning of diversity. It's meeting individuals where they are and helping them on their journey. Again, it's not a check the box, it's a journey. So you're going to be on it for months, maybe years. Maybe it's transformative and you start a diversity journey at a job, but you take it to your next job or your community. So it is okay to know what you don't know and ask the questions to support what you don't know. Totally fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One last comment before we move into like the broader landscape. You know,
Yeah.
Emmanuel Ocho, who I'll put the link in there, that he wrote Conversations
Yes.
with a Black Man. It's a book, and I think it started with a video. I've got a mental note to self to go watch them and go read the
Yeah.
book. But I love what he said about privilege. He said if you don't know him, I did not. He
Oh, I do
actually,
know him.
yeah, he grew up with he went to like a white prep school or boarding school, and so
Yeah,
he grew up in a bit more of a white culture, so to say.
he
Um,
did.
and what he says is he said to my white brothers and sisters, don't feel shame because you're white, but understand that it
Right.
brings privilege. And what you're trying to do is take that privilege and help it to benefit those who don't have the privilege you have.
Yes, that's beautifully said. Emmanuel Acho is amazing. I know he has a series of videos. I think they're all on YouTube now. There was some kind of hit and miss you could catch, maybe series one or series four, but now they're all on YouTube. So yeah,
Okay.
please share the link.
Yeah. I'm going to go find it and it's going to put it in the show notes. So
Yeah.
I feel like things have changed a lot since 2020. And so it's been really a rapidly changing landscape. I'm just curious what you think and how organizations can ensure their commitment to DEI&B
Hmm.
remains strong and resilient. Because I've not missed, and you probably haven't either, the articles where things are slipping. Some of the
Yeah.
DEI&B leaders are being removed from their companies or let go.
Yeah.
Things are changing. So how can we stay committed to the journey?
Yeah, and that's a big question that I do get often. What we've seen with the DEIB being at risk, and to your point, people being laid off or let go, we're seeing companies with diversity initiatives that are a separate goal, separate and apart from their company initiatives. So, one of the things I like to share with my clients and with anyone who will listen is in order to maintain a consistent DEIB best practice, to keep up with your goals, integrate your diversity and inclusion work throughout your OKRs, if that's what you do, your company goals, your SMART goals, however you measure success at your company, DEIB should be integrated. One way to do that, Shannon, is to really start looking at a company's mission, vision, and values.
Mhm.
Who is the company? How do they want to show up? How would you be able to explain your company to an intern right out of college or to a brand new, really qualified candidate or employee? You want to make sure that the company knows who they are first, and then being able to incorporate DEIB initiatives within the mission, vision, and values. That helps to support your goals and it's sustainable, right? Over
Right.
time.
Because it's part of the
Another
fabric of
oh,
that company, is what you're saying, right?
exactly.
Right.
It's
Okay.
woven into the fabric, beautifully put. Another area of opportunity I think companies could really use is just ensuring that they understand the why, as I said earlier, that they understand the why behind their diversity initiatives.
Mm.
So, an example is a company will say, hey, we're going to go ahead and put in a diversity initiative, and we're going to do it around gender, and then we're going to do it around Black and Latinx, and we're going to, okay, why? Do you have some data that supports why you're actually doing this? A lot of companies think, oh, I need to, what I call boil the ocean. I need to do all the diversity things to be successful. And that's actually not true. Take one initiative. As long as it's what the company stands for, take that initiative, build it into your OKRs, your goals, whatever they are. Make sure it's properly communicated. And then share with folks the why, how you'll be a part of this diversity inclusion, what the expectation is off of one initiative. It can be simple, like we're going to use inclusive pronouns now. So we might have employees that are trans and they want to be known as they or he, they or she. Just start using the right pronouns for individuals. If you want to go a step further, consider like a self ID campaign.
Mm.
Maybe in your applicant tracking system, having folks identify, if they'd like, having them identify who they are, how they identify, are gay, lesbian, straight, Black, white, Latinx, that kind of thing, completely optional. And you can even go a step further and put a self ID campaign into your HRIS system.
Mm.
So folks can identify, see themselves. Then you have data. Then you have something to go off of. If you're seeing a shortage of women in engineering, or maybe trans people don't be seen aren't being seen, then you have data from some of these self ID campaigns to be able to make decisions. You can then maybe launch an employee voice survey, employee engagement survey. That's another way for people to see themselves and identify. Those are basic, simple ways for companies to implement a diversity inclusion strategy. Super basic, nothing about boiling the ocean. So that's one way.
What do you think about? So it was been a while, so forgive me. I forget her name. I'll have to look it up for the show notes. There was a Dare to Lead podcast. She was a diversity, equity, and inclusion focus to her career. And she talked about
Mm-hmm.
how obviously metrics matter, but
They
that the
do.
story element makes it has to be the personal story aspect has to make it more transformative. Metrics matter, but it can't just be metrics.
About
How have you
metrics.
seen that, or how do you coach
Yeah.
clients to incorporate the personal story aspect of it?
Yeah, the personal story is so key because, again, if people don't understand the why does this match our company goals? Why are we doing this? why it's important. Without a story, people aren't going to attach to it. They're not going to see themselves, and they're not going to be able to explain it to others, especially when we look at leadership. When leadership comes together and they say, hey, we've got some diversity initiatives, I want my leaders to be able to communicate that all the way down, all the way through the organization. No matter who comes to you as a leader, you should be able to talk about, here are our 3 diversity initiatives. This is our story. This is why it matters to us. And what do you think, person I'm explaining it to? Because people who hear the story may want to add to the story, share their experiences, share what they've dealt with at a previous company or college or what have you. So the story, Shannon, is so key when you're thinking about metrics do matter, but the story is key.
Yeah, I love that because I never thought of the 2 sides of that coin. But I was
Yeah.
like, oh, that makes complete sense. You really need the integration of both.
Yep.
So you mentioned meeting leaders where they are. I think that was at the very beginning. And I think
Yeah.
at Stone Soup, you're really, really emphasizing that holistic approach to meeting leaders where they are. Can you
Mm-hmm.
share an example, like when addressing one aspect of belonging, how that meeting people where they are, how that's had a ripple effect on other elements like equity and inclusion within your org?
Yeah. Yeah. It's there's so many examples out there, but I'll give you one example from a recent client I'm currently working with now. And I'm going to go back to just the use of pronouns. So this particular client had its first trans employee.
Mm,
And this was a different generation. So I think when we meet folks where they are, I want to give a caveat. There are different generations that will be met in different ways. I will say it feels like some of our folks from Generation Z or maybe millennials, it might be a different conversation than some of our baby boomer Gen Y generation because of the way we grew up, because of the
yep.
systemic racism people have seen, because of the conversations that were never had, because of the lack of vulnerability around certain
Mm,
conversations. So this particular client was more of the baby boomer generation. And again, no shame around that, but they'd
right.
had their first trans employee. And for them, it just couldn't make sense. This individual identified as she, although they met this individual years before as a he. This person worked with the company for many, many years. And one of the things that I sat and kind of taught and trained or created some education around is I want you to think about someone calling you a different name other than Shannon, the
Mm,
name you grew up with. So maybe we start calling you Kathy. Are you going to answer to Kathy? Probably not, unless it's your middle name, unless it's a nickname. So that's how it's an easy concept, not super innovative, but I just started the conversation baseline. What if someone called you by a different name? Okay, yeah, obviously that would be uncomfortable and you would want to answer. And what if the person kept calling you by that name, even though you told them, my name is Shannon, a
yep.
hundred times?
I'm laughing
It
because I
start
get called Sharon all the time. It's just
Oh,
a
right.
simple,
I get
it's a
called
simple
Danielle all the
mistake,
time.
right?
Exactly. It's a
Yeah.
simple mistake. And it's, your job is probably to educate and re-educate. And I said, how do you think a person who identifies as a gender other than what you believe they should identify, how do you think they feel? What is it that you think they would feel like being called the wrong gender? And then finally, how would you feel being called the wrong gender? That would be difficult for a
Mm,
lot of people. And really having that kind of open, safe space conversation help them see the importance of making sure you're inclusive and identifying the person as a gender that they've asked
yep.
you to identify them as, and not calling them what you believe they should be called.
Yeah. I'm going to be really vulnerable here and tell you, I'm
Sure.
a Gen Xer. So I
Okay.
come from, I've struggled in 2 ways. One,
Okay.
the pronoun they, because in my
Yeah.
mind growing up, they is a plural pronoun. So they means more than
Correct.
one person, right? That's
Yes.
just the
Yeah.
context of my life, the way
Huh.
I grew up. So I struggle figuring out. I've even just read an article about someone who went by the pronoun they, and I would get to the
Yeah.
part where they referred to the individual with they. And I was like, wait a minute, I thought we were talking about one
How does
person.
that
And
work?
I've had to try to figure that out for myself. I'm not sure I've quite gotten there yet. And to be honest,
Yeah.
I've been in a meeting with someone that I didn't know very well, but I knew the person had I don't know what to say it, switched pronouns. And so I was
Okay.
felt so awkward in the meeting because I did
Yeah.
not want to use the wrong one. And I didn't know how to. I was like, I don't know if it's he or she. I wasn't even sure how to
Okay.
approach it. And honestly, I kept using their name because
Yeah.
and they may have been uncomfortable with that because I was so uncertain. And I
And
think
you're
this is
kind
where,
of conscious of it,
yep,
right?
I'm conscious and I'm so
Yeah.
uncertain, not wanting to say he or she because I wasn't sure what the right
Hmm.
pronoun was.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, wow, they may actually feel more uncomfortable right now because,
They pro You're right. They do,
yep,
and you do too. So let's not take away from both sides. You're feeling uncomfortable in the moment because you're not sure how they identify. They're feeling uncomfortable because maybe they haven't shared with you, or they've shared and it's okay that you've forgotten. So I just want to give a couple of pointers on your
yep.
podcast, if that's okay.
Perfect. That's why I brought the story because
Perfect.
I can't be by myself in this.
No, you're not by yourself 100%. So some of the advice or recommendation I give, depending on the comfort level in the room or just between two individuals, it's okay to say, "Hi, my name is Shannon. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. Can I get your pronouns? Would you mind sharing your pronouns?"
Mm,
Something along those lines. That person will say, "Hi, I'm Dani. My pronouns are also she, her, and hers." Or if you've heard that the person has since changed their pronouns to maybe she, they, them, or maybe they, he, it's okay to ask, "Hey, would you remind me of what your pronouns might be? I just want to make sure that I am inclusive in our conversations."
that was a good one. I should have done
It's
that because I didn't
very,
work with this person
no,
very
it's okay.
much. It was just
It's,
like a one-off type thing, and I was
it's
like, "Crap, I've
okay.
heard this and I don't remember."
It's totally okay. And I get that question a lot. Well, how do I ask? And I don't want to offend. It's
Right.
completely okay. The other pointer I want to give is this: we are human. We're going to forget. It's okay. Just like we'll forget each other's name. People call you Sherry. People call me Danielle. People will forget names. They'll forget pronouns. One of the things you can do if you've gendered someone and said the wrong pronoun, say, "I apologize. I believe you said your pronouns are they, them. I will make sure that I include they, them in our conversation. My
Mm,
apologies." Don't go into, "I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh, this is terrible." Don't make it about you
right.
because that
Good point.
person's probably misgendered a lot in their day and they're probably having to take care of others who are constantly
Mhm.
apologizing, and that can get exhausting, to be honest.
Sure.
So it's okay, just a clean apology. "I'm sorry. I believe you go by they, them," or "someone gave me feedback that you go by they, them. I'll make sure that I use they, them when we speak."
Mm, that's a good
And
one.
finally, it's okay to practice with other folks. "Hey, I'm talking about John. John goes by John and they." Practice that out loud. Practice with a coworker if you feel vulnerable or comfortable. And that way you get used to it. It takes time. So don't give yourself
Yep.
a bad time. Don't shame or blame yourself.
But I think it's an important thing here in that as we're all growing in this space, I think we're afraid of failure, and the failure is
Oh,
inevitably
yeah.
going to happen.
Yes.
You're going to put your foot in it, even if you have the best
Hmm.
intentions. The impact may not be what it needed to be. You may use
Yep.
the wrong pronouns. It could be a whole host of things. But to
Yeah.
grow, you have to grow into it. You have to move through it.
Right. And that's an important point that you've just mentioned, the growth piece as well as the stepping in it. So, as a diversity practitioner, it's one thing that I hear other practitioners say, especially when we're teaching and training on a concept like privilege or intersectionality or using pronouns. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when people are going to step in it. And we as diversity professionals, we as leaders, we as allies, our jobs are to help people step out of it in a thoughtful way. Not in, again, not in a shaming, "you should have known," but in a thoughtful, "Hey, Shannon, let me give you some feedback. Bob over there goes by they, them. That's okay. Just a reminder." and move right on to the next part of the conversation.
Good point.
Yeah.
So this next question, Dani, is one of my favorites.
Sure.
So as organizations navigate a very delicate balance between prioritizing diversity practices and
Mm-hmm.
addressing resistance/skepticism, what strategies do you recommend to foster that culture that embraces inclusivity without alienate part of the workforce? And before you
Yeah.
answer, I've seen this not from a racial standpoint, but from a gender
Mm-hmm.
standpoint. So as
Yes.
the company that I work for is signed up for parity initiatives with gender perspectives,
Mm-hmm.
you've seen the resistance. So I'm really curious to see what your answer is on this one.
Yeah. So I had a phenomenal leader at Gusto named Bernard Coleman. Look him up. He's amazing. Um, he was the chief diversity officer, I think, for the Hillary campaign and for the Society of Human Resources. He's got an amazing CV. One thing he taught me is that when we're talking about diversity or teaching and training or creating knowledge and awareness, you want to put the broccoli in the brownie. And what that means is you want to get the nutrients in there, but it's okay to still make it taste good. And so that's my approach. Whenever I'm putting content together, whenever I'm speaking to someone about diversity initiatives, whenever I'm giving guidance or recommendations, I put the broccoli in the brownie. So here's a good example. If we're if we're talking about gender parity or maybe the pay gap and gender parity when it comes to pay and equity, a lot of people, to your point, will get very upset and very nervous. What do you mean we're not paying our women the same? That can't be true. It is true 9 times out of 10. There's lots of data out there. We can look at the McKinsey study and several other studies that show that women are impacted in various ways in corporate America. And what we can do is when we're putting together a training or we're having a conversation, we can incorporate that thought process into the training. It doesn't have to be a diversity training. It could be as simple as a Harvard Business Review article. Maybe you've got a group of engineers sitting around a meeting table and they're wondering, hey, how do we get more women to join our team? Or how do we ensure pay equity? Someone can basically share an article. And the last 15 minutes of your team meeting, talk about the article, talk about what you've learned, share with others. Sometimes, again, broccoli and the brownie, it can be reading a book and sharing it out with your group or thinking of a concept, pay equity or some other diversity related concept, bringing it to the table and making sure that people are all talking about it, not just the one person bringing it to the table. So you can assign a pre-read, let's say, of some particular, study or white paper or article so that folks can have a chance to digest it, to read it, maybe ask folks to write down 2 or 3 questions. And my final example about broccoli and the brownie is something I've seen firsthand working in tech. And I don't mean to pick on the engineers. Engineers are
That's
great
okay. I'm
folks.
an engineer. You can keep picking
I
on
know
us.
you're an
We're good.
engineer too. But what we see often is in meetings where we might have 1 or 2 women and the rest of the group is homogenous, it might not be all male, or we might have 1 or 2 folks of color and the rest of the group is homogenous. When there's a discussion about a new product, a new design, a new mission, engineers may skip over the voices of women. They may skip over the voices of people of color, even when a woman or a person of color has spoken up about a specific initiative, has spoken up about an idea. That idea often gets passed over and then it's regurgitated or reparroted with one of the homogenous engineers in the group, if you will.
Right.
So my ask is this: when that occurs, stop the conversation, be an ally in the moment and say, hey, I think Shannon just came up with that idea. Let's hear what Shannon had to, thanks Bob for re-sharing Shannon's thoughts, but let's go back to Shannon and hear her idea and go around the room and make sure everyone's voice is heard about the idea, not just those folks who help make the decisions or who help drive the product or who help drive the mission. Those are those broccoli and the brownie ways that I think I've seen success.
Hmm.
Does that answer the question?
It does. And I also
Yeah,
think sometimes, when you're a brainstorming session, things will come pretty fast and people's
yeah,
idea may get just ignored completely, right? Maybe somebody doesn't
100%.
regurgitate it, but maybe it just gets skipped. So I think if you're a leader or a project leader, facilitator, make sure that
Right.
if that person's voice gets skipped, go back. Say,
Yeah,
can we just hold this for a second? Let's go back and get Dani's thoughts. I think we missed what she was saying.
exactly. And I know that, again, that takes vulnerability. It's uncomfortable. But what I've seen, Shannon, is when leaders do it normally in a meeting, when they're practicing it, when they're showing it, others will follow. So more junior leaders will follow, individual contributors will follow. Inter- Once they see a leader lead in that way, they will follow that type of leadership model most
Yeah.
times.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
the third thing I would say is make sure you always give credit where credit is due. So if you had an
Yes.
idea and I thought about something that could build on your idea, say, "Oh, Dani, that's a great idea. I love that. Made me think about this."
Yeah.
It's like not just cut that person out of the equation.
Yeah, exactly. And it's these little I mean, I think that maybe these are very small things, this broccoli and the brownie concept, but they're just bite-sized approaches to incorporating diversity
Mm,
overall. They might be one here, one there, one here, but soon it will actually, perpetuate throughout the company so that
agreed.
a lot of people are taking on those bite-sized practices.
All right, I have one more tough question for you. So,
Sure.
as you've worked with your clients, have you observed any innovative or unexpected approaches that organizations have taken to embed diversity into their daily operations and strategies? Anything that really surprised you?
Yeah, I was thinking about this question before we hopped on, and that's also where I thought about, doing the bite size or the broccoli and the brownie. But one really cool thing, and I'm just going to give my previous employer, Gusto, a pat on the back for innovation here. We created not only a fulsome strategy, but we created a journey. So our platform that we created was called RISE,
Mm,
Representation, Inclusion, Social Impact, and Equity.
hmm,
And rise was it's four pillars. Think of it as like a stool with four legs. If you chop off one of the legs a little bit and shorten it, the stool's going to wobble. It's not really going to work. You have to have four full legs on the stool for rise to work. And so one of the cool innovations with Rise was not just our Rise strategy, was not just embedding it into the business, not just having some really cool content that I had the opportunity to write over time, but we came up with what's called Rise Bites. And Rise Bites was a really cool session every Thursday at 12 o'clock Mountain Time, 2 o'clock Eastern, 11 o'clock Pacific, where we would get together for an hour and discuss a diversity initiative. Sometimes we would have guest speakers from employee resource groups or affinity groups. Sometimes we'd have an author be a guest speaker. Sometimes it was a timely topic that was going on
hmm,
recently, like maybe the war is going on around the world and how
hmm.
people are dealing with it and feeling about it. And it just created such a wonderful space for people to share, to get educated. Gusto is about 2,000, 2,500 employees, and we
Okay.
would have hundreds of people come to
Oh,
Rise
wow. That's a
Bites
good take
every week.
rate for a company that
Hundreds
size.
of
Yep.
people to come to Rise Bites for that hour every week.
Hmm,
I really thought that was an innovative practice because it allowed people who may not be able to take all the Rise trainings, who may not be able to dive deeply into their Rise learning journey, they could at least go to Rise Bites once a week and get something out of it. They can see themselves, they can get some knowledge, they can learn to be an ally in the space, and then they can move on until next week. So that's one of the innovative practices I really loved.
I really love that because being in ERGs for a long time or employee resource groups,
Yeah,
you often see the same people. And not that I'm
yeah,
not continuing to learn or grow, but you're not spreading the learning. So it's really nice. I mean, it's easier to sign up for being an hour than it is to sign up to be on an ERG committee or something like that.
right. Right, exactly. So you can give your time. We do ask for our employees to be on Zoom on screen, but if they choose to be off screen because they've got things going on in the background, that's fine too. And we always take a poll to see what topics are relevant, who they'd like to hear speak next. So that, again, it's integrative. It's not just the RISE team talking about diversity. It's integrated out into the entire organization. Even our CEO has been part of RISE Bites.
That's fun.
Yeah.
All right, I have two questions left. The last one, and I'd love to end with
Yeah.
this. What is one piece of advice or a quote you would love to leave with our audience?
Yeah. I think I said this earlier, but I'm just going to repeat it. When we're thinking about adopting any DE&IB strategy or initiative or training, it will always and should always be a discussion. It should never be a lecture. It should always be a discussion with everyone in the room. I know people are nervous. I know they're afraid, but it should be a discussion. Once it becomes a lecture, folks will just lose interest. It'll be a compliance training.
Yeah, and then
that.
they'll turn the defense mechanism will come up too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's, as a diversity professional, it's not my job to tell you how you think diversity, equity, inclusion should be. It's really your job to tell each other what you think DEIB should be for your company. So I say that to say, making your DEIB initiatives and practice what's right for your company, something that's sustainable, like we talked about earlier. You want to make sure that the behavior that you're asking for out there, like we know diversity, equity, inclusion, it's not a moneymaker. It's probably not something you see on your bottom line in your P&L, but there's probably a behavior you want changed. There's probably maybe a retention conversation that needs to happen because you're seeing a lot of attrition.
Right.
You want to make sure that that's what's right for you and your company when you're putting those initiatives together.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Completely agreed. I love that. Discussion,
Yeah.
not a lecture.
Always.
So very true. All right. My final question is easy. Where can folks find you as you launch this wonderful new company of yours?
Yeah. Thanks, Shannon. I appreciate it. So I'm at stonesoupdiversity.com, Stone Soup Diversity, all one word, no dashes, no spaces.com. I'm also on LinkedIn under Dannette, Dani in parentheses, Nelson. Because Stone Soup is a new business, I'm still putting together Instagram pages and Facebook pages and things like that. I'm still setting that up. But you can definitely find me on my website, on LinkedIn, a lot more information out there. Yeah, that's where you can find me for right now.
And you need to find her. She'll be one of your new best friends because I met her once and was completely enamored. So that's why she is here. She's been kind enough to bless us with your time. Thank you so much. I love the conversation. I appreciate your honesty and vulnerability and friendship.
Of course. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. We will see you soon. See you in the next episode. Bye, everybody.